Hello, this is Christian. Welcome to Angular. In this video, let's do the put or update of the CRUD operation using this HTTP client RSJX library in Angular. So this is a scenario here. We're gonna send a we're gonna fetch. Well, first we actually fetch the data from remote server first, and we display the data to a form page. We click edit, and then we're gonna edit that information here. We send that off to the subscription, and then the Angular service will be sending that put request to the server and update that data. So let's go and see how this is done. Okay, so here's our app again. Last time we created the display and the ad, we're able to add one extra flight down here. And so this time we're going to go and say, click on this, and then we're going to edit that information here in the form. Again, we're not validating at all. We just make sure everything, or assume everything is going to be correct. And so let's go and see how this is done. And this is the service. So we're going to invoke this function down here. Actually, we don't have one yet. We're going to create one now here. And so when we update, we actually need the ID number, right? So kind of similar to the get or delete here. So I'm going to put right here, copy this, and duplicate that right down here. And this will be for update, just update 1. And so it would say update flight, and it takes the ID and also the payload. Okay, so two things. So this will be the flight of type flight, and then we're gonna send in the URL with no ID. Actually, it does right now with the ID. This ID matches the ID, and then the second parameter is the payload. In this case, is the flight information. Okay, so let's see. Let's see here what's going on. No overload matches this. Oh yeah, this is gonna be a not get, but it's gonna be a put. That's why. All right, so there we go. We got that function all set up, and we're good here. We can close this now, and let's load our edit. This is the one here. This is the source, and this is the HTML. Okay, so everything's all set up here. When we submit this form, it's going to send in this F object, the ng form, to the submit function. It's going to get all the data. Now we need to bind to a data. Okay, so as you can see, nothing's binding here yet. So we need to fill that in. And then the very bottom here, let's see when we submit, it's a submit type. Yeah, so we just need to bind this data here. So first, let's do and fetch our service. Right now, I just had it put it here so it doesn't error out, but I'm going to change this. So we need to get the ID number. That's one thing. And this time, because we're fetching data remotely from a different server, we cannot use the snapshot. Okay, you want to use the asynchronous call, which means we're going to get it using a different method here. Very, very identical to the snapshot, but we're not going to use that one. And also, we're going to inject the services in here as well. So let's do that injection first. First, I'm going to inject the flight service. Here you go, we got that. And then to get the parameter of the URL and the ID, we need to also inject another one called the route activator router. Okay, so this one here, this token allows us to fetch any parameter or all the parameters in the URL. And one of those parameters that we want is the ID, and that is what we set inside our router, right? So here's the route when we pass to the edit, and it fetch an ID. So this is the field that we want to grab. Whatever you call it, this is one of them. If you can have a lot of IDs or a lot of fields, you can fetch those as well and use that. So now, and that's what this ID is for. Okay, it's the actual number of this route. Okay, so in the ng init here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this route ID first. So I would say this dot route dot param map. Okay, I'm going to call the param map here. And this param map, we have to subscribe. So you can see subscribe again. And when you subscribe, you can see that the observer is, sending back some data. Okay, so here we have really a parameters object. Usually you have a lot of them. We're going to pass that to the function, and then I'm using the arrow function here. And all I'm doing just one data. So it's not a big deal. You could have you have a single line output here, separate line away. So now this parameter here has access to the parameter, in the URL. So I'm going to assign this ID from this parameter group. So say this ID is equal to the params dot get, and the get function here, you can see the string of the field or properties or token, right? URL token, and that's what we want to get. And there's an error here. That's what it says. ID number, and we got a string. Yep. So we said it's a number, but we're getting a string, so it's a conflict here, right? So either you can turn these off to say any, but we don't want that because the actual ID in the database is a number. So you want to basically just cast this to int. Okay, you wrap the whole thing and convert that to integer, and that will be assigned to integer, and we're good to go. And actually, this is not. This is the function, and then I need to close it with the curly right there. I have too many curlies. That one for this one here. That's for that. And I need one more for that. Yeah, it's a lot of them. And then that's the subscription. We can close that, and this is extra one. Yeah, that's why it's easier to put in a separate line like this. Okay. So now we are done with that one. That's all I'm doing. I got the ID already. And then once you get that, then you can call a function, maybe like to load the data. So I guess I'll just call a load function here, load data. It will get this data from the service. Okay, I'll create it right here. Load data, and this function is going to call this service and then pass the data of the ID to it to fetch the data back. We assign that data to this flight data here. So we'll say this dot flight service dot get. We need to get first, get a single flight information. Okay, and then the ID is this ID that we just received from the URL. Again, you have to subscribe to, okay? If you don't subscribe, you're not going to get any data back. So it won't work. That means I have to go here and put here the dot subscribe. You put in a separate line. It's easier to see that way. And then the data coming back in the observer is going to be the data, the payload, and then we can set this flight equal to this data that came back. Okay, so this data here is the one that is sent back from the server based on the ID we sent to it. Okay, so now then this will be populated, and so instead of just the empty object here, I'm gonna assign this to as a class. And so I don't want to say this either. If I just do this, I might get an error. This is the flight class. If I import it, this is the class that we have, and that's this one here, right? It's a class. You can use it as a if I do an assignment, not assignment, a type flight like this, it might error out because initially when you run it, there's no data yet, and it's going to be displayed on the browser already. At that time, all these .id and so on were not there yet, so you might have an error. And so now we got that done, and then so here I need to say instead of assignment, type, I have to say a new flight. It's an object. Okay, we'll test the other one if it works, but usually this is when they do. Okay, for edit, you have to pre-populate this with data first, and then this comes later. So now in our form, we need to bind this data now. Let me close this over here. So the flight ID needs to bind to, so I do the two-way data binding. Okay, so ng model is going to bind to the flight.id. That's the one. And I'll just copy this, put it down here for the, this is the flight number. So flight number. Oops. Flight number. And then this one here is the airline. And it's really hard to see. Let's do this. Okay. This one here will be the trip type. And this one here is departure airport. And arrival airport. Departure date. And then arrival date. Return date, I'm saying. Return date. Okay. So I think that's it for this one. Let's see if it loads. Let's go check it out. The browser. It did already. It was great, right? So again, if you refresh it, go back to the flights, go to show flights, and let's say I want to edit this one here. So there you go. It grabs that information here. I go back and do number 4, and so on. So it loads very beautifully. Now I mentioned earlier that if you don't subscribe, it's not going to work. So for example, if I go back and if I don't subscribe to this function, if I just say, you know, I terminate that here, okay, and if I leave that out like that, and if you do something like this dot flight equals that, right, it may not work because I need to subscribe to that. So a type of any, and have a conflict because it's a different type, so I have to maybe as flight. It's observable. Yeah, it's a different type. So if you don't invoke it, it's not going to work. Let's see here. Okay, I'm going to force it to type any. And so if I save this now and go back again, let's see if it lets me. Okay, so you can see that no data comes through because it did not, we didn't really invoke it to make it happen. So that's why it's important to make sure that you subscribe to that, and in order for it to work. Okay, so I'm just gonna undo this. So we subscribe to that, and then we're good here. And so now when we edit, we click the submit button. We're going to do the edit here. And then we have to also submit to be true once we're done. So again, when you submit the changes, you have to subscribe. So flight service, we're going to do a update. And update takes 2 parameters. One is the ID, so it'll be this ID, and the payload will be just the f.value. Okay, all the values coming from the form. And again, subscribe. So the data is the one that's coming back, right? This is a function, but we need that parameter. And then I do 2 things. One is I'm gonna say this dot submitted is now true, and that's it really. But we also can console log the data, the original data, so form the ef.value, and then also log the data coming back, which is in the case as data. I think maybe just the same data coming back. So let's see what happens. All right, so let's go into the site and refresh our page, and I'm going to edit the first one. Just change that to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Pretty long one. And submit. It says submitted already. Let's go check it out. And there you go. We changed that to that field. Right? So it works. And I can change it back again to just 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, before I change it though, I want to show in the database to make sure that it really does work. Okay? So we change that to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I load that. And you can see that the field here has been changed, right, because of the new update. Okay, so now let's go back and change it to 1, 2, 3, 4 again. Submit, and then it's back again. Okay, so last thing is, again, just make sure you subscribe. If you don't subscribe, you just leave it like this, like that, it's not gonna work. Okay, if you just do like that. Let me turn all this off, and so if I save this, even though I don't put the true thing here, well, let's say this that submitted is true. We'll force that to be true as if it's been submitted. And now let's go back and edit the first field. I'll put here, 5555, click submit. It says successfully added. It should say submitted, edited, but you can show that it didn't change, right? It didn't change the data. We can also show the database, refresh it. You see that it did not reflect that here at all. Okay, so make sure you really invoke that function, the service, using the subscription or even work. Okay, that's really important here. So that is the put operation or edit. And if you have any questions, just let me know, and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions.